it's busy with the filming. And I want to say one more thing before I introduce the speakers, and that is, this panel is about informal education. So what does that have to do with me? I'm Jewish, I'm becoming a doctor. And so the answer is twofold. Number one, when I was your age, I did not think I'd be a rabbi. I think I'd be bald. There's a lot of things I would have done with. And I'm not saying you need to become a rabbi, but this stage in your life, when you're seeing what Jewish people need, and the greatest thing in the world is to be able to impact another Jew, every person should think to themselves, is there some way I can and should be impacting the Jewish people on a greater level? And Baruch Hashem, our public thought that at this age, and therefore these speakers thought that at this age, and that's why the world is a richer place Jewishly. And many of you may be the next people who should be up here on the panel. It's only once you take yourself seriously in that way. Second point I'd like to make is, even if you're sure you're not one of those people, you should still stay in the room. The reason why is because every Jew is an educator, whether they choose to be it or not. Every Jew impacts other Jews. For sure, informally. The decision you make is whether that impact is going to be meaningful or not. And the way it becomes meaningful is by learning how to maximize the way you can impact other people. Being a correct Jew is someone who sees his responsibility as giving everything he receives. And that was the mission of the first Jew of Avraham Avinu. What we know about Avraham Avinu is he was a Kiruv man. That's the first Jew. He came to believe and wanted everybody else to believe. And that's why the program we have tonight is really expressive of a basic part of what should be your identity as B'nai Torah, as B'nai Yeshiva. I want to thank particularly the speakers who are both very busy people involved in very important projects for making time tonight for this. We'll start from the one closest to me, Moshe Benovitz, who's both a Ram at Yeshivat Beishet Yerushalayim, and is also the director of the time right of the Hakotel. Both things in which he makes a tremendous impact. Also a chaver from many years ago, throughout the process. And you should talk to him for his efforts in making it here tonight. And he came last year, we didn't succeed in turning him off. And Baruch Hashem, he's back this year, and we hope that he'll continue to come and share his wisdom with our boys. In the middle, I want to thank, I don't know when he'll come, Benny Friedman. Every year the middle chair remains open for a while. Last year there was another speaker who came away. Don't tell them I'm sitting in the middle, or come this way, etc. But hopefully Rabbi will be a soon. Rabbi, for those who don't know him, one of the Rosh Yeshiva of Oraita, and also the head of the Israelite, I think, more or less, Kiruv program from Oraita, and really a tremendous person, like Moshe, who I want to share from his perspective. And last but not least, I want to give a personal thank you to my neighbor, Rabbi Rothner, who I think is well known and needs no introduction about his creative shitot of chinuch and of hands-on chinuch. I still remember my visit with my wife Stone and all the things we saw there, the big fun, I remember this, and did so many different projects. And really, the couple has done an excellent job of bringing three, hopefully, people who each one is a star of informal education and formal education. It's an acronym of informal education. Take every word you'll hear here tonight. They'll all be pearls. More important than what you hear, internalize them. Think about how can I be more, in my way, like what these people are doing, and be able to contribute as well. Because the people, they're doing what they're doing. The question is what you'll be doing, and hopefully Mitzvah will all aim for you to do more. Thank you again each for coming, and we should continue sharing nachas and talmidim. Yes. Oh. We'd like to begin by thanking our panelists for taking the time. We'd like to begin by asking each of the program directors to take 5 minutes to explain the significance of their form of education and their personal story of how they became involved in it. Afterwards, we'll start taking questions we've prepared and then questions from the crowd as time permits. So, since I started the introduction to the motion, why don't we start with review the actual words, less. You can flip a coin. Now that Rabbi is here, I want to formally welcome him. We already said all the great work about him before you came in. I appreciate the Oraita and the Israelite program, and a tremendous informal educator, informal. And we thank Rabbi for taking the time to be with us tonight. I know being Thanksgiving weekend, Rabbi probably has a lot of things going on, and thank you for making the time to be here. We're not going to punish you by having you start. So now one of the other two things. We were asking each one to take 5 minutes to explain the significance of their form of education and their personal story of how they became involved in it. Do we have a volunteer?
My name is Yehuda Rothner. I grew up in Cleveland. I've been involved in Machanesco for 38 years since I was a Chanich. I've been the director now for 20 years, just about 20 years. I learned Yeshivat Har Etzion for 2 years. In fact, the young man sitting next to me was my roommate for almost 2 years, I think. That's correct. Yes, that's true. Afterwards, I made the decision not to go to YU, and I went to Case Western Reserve University. There I did, my majors were varied. They were ancient Greek classics, medical epidemiology, archaeology, then with masters in education and in history. And the entire time that I was back in Cleveland, I felt going back to Cleveland was an inyan shel shlichut, and I went back there in order to be involved in Bnei Akiva, to be involved in teaching in pretty much every major school across the entire spectrum, whether it was Orthodox, conservative, reform. And I did that for during my years in college, etc. And all that time I was still very pa'il in Machaneh. Then after that, in 1994, with my wife and then 3 children, we made Aliyah back to Aron Shvut, and I went back to Yeshiva for another 6 years, learning in Kollel. And after that, I was asked to become the principal of Yitz Mizrahi School in Cleveland for 4 years, and then again continuing my job at Machaneh Stone. So I was both involved, and I think that that's something that we will kind of parse out here a little bit this evening, the liminality, so to speak, between formal and informal worlds and modalities. I'm not sure that the bifurcation that we're making here tonight is necessarily so clear. I was involved both at the same time, heading up the school, teaching 6, 7 classes a day, etc., and then working in Machaneh. Then we came back in 2004, and then I taught in middle school here for 3 years in Nocham. Continuing my job in Machaneh Stone, and then continuing after that because I didn't feel I was giving my students enough time. Because I was traveling so much from Machaneh to try to move it from point A to point B, I wasn't able to give my students in middle school enough time, and I put that teaching to the side. And we'll see what's going to happen because I plan to leave Machaneh Stone in 2 years, hopefully to begin a venture here starting in 7th through 12th, middle school and high school in the United States. That's part of a little bit about my background. In terms of Machaneh, I think that Machanehut in general and Capstone in specific is the most powerful educational paradigm. An immersive summer experience in Machaneh is critical to really understanding your holistic Jewish education, not only what goes on during the 10 months of the year, but especially what goes on during the summer, in which it's immersive, and which you have the time to act on it to create a social community. Not going back home to your parents necessarily, but actually you as young people, we as young people being involved in creating the community that we really want to have as a utopia for what we would hope we would be able to construct at some other later time, or maybe here we not so. That's one of the main purposes of Machaneh Stone. In terms of the overall ideological context, it's important to understand that Machaneh Stone is a Bnei Akiva Machaneh, and the ideas of Torah, Avodah, Aliyah are central to that mission. And I'm sure over time, as questions go on, those things will percolate out. I think what Machaneh Stone brings in terms of my educational vision, which is a little bit different, is that again, those informal and formal worlds are kind of really fused together in what I call experience or experiential education. And what we do in Machaneh Stone kind of pushes that envelope in a very, very real, authentic, and meaningful sense, in which maybe other programs don't push it to that same degree.
First of all, we will be testing you on your resume later. So my name is Benny Friedman. I'm currently one of the Rosh Yeshivat Oraita, my neighbors, and we love Hakotel a lot. Amazing. I came to Israel when I was 18. I grew up in New York. Came to Gush, spent a couple years in Gush, had the privilege of learning with then he was Kevin Tarragon, as a Rav, Adam. And I want to take a moment just to thank you Cutler, Taryn, he's still here, for inviting us. I think this is an awesome thing that you do here. And I also want to thank you for welcoming some of the writing students who said to join us. I had actually 3 junctions, 3 nekudot mifneh in my journey. The first was, I think somewhere during my Shana Aleph year, I was all set. I got into Columbia. I was going to go back and do pre-law. I was all excited. I thought that I was going to change the world. Somewhere along Shana Aleph, I decided that I would end up taking a different tack. I decided to stay Shana Bet, highly recommended. And then I decided I was going to stay in Israel. I thought if I was going to stay in Israel, I should do the right thing. I joined the Israeli army. I started as a Hezdernik. I ended up leaving Hezder to become an officer. I was in the army for 4.5 years. I became a PA, a company commander. I majored in military strategy. And then after that, I had decided I wanted to go into the world of chinuch, which is an interesting term to discuss, but I guess we'll get to that. And then I came back, after the army, I came back to Gush. I was in Hakotel, with my thesis degree, learned Yeshivat. The second mifneh happened. It wasn't such a turning point for me to go into Jewish education. I think I always somehow wanted to do that. But I think at a certain point you have a decision as to what sort of educator you want to be. And there is a tremendous time on it. It's a nice age to have to really be swimming in Shas and Poskin. You become a posei, become comfortable with that. Then you gotta realize, like, if you really want to do that, you have to spend 20 years in Yeshiva. And I had a burning desire to get out and make a difference and make that decision. I guess that was the second mifneh. The third mifneh was really what sort of education you want to get involved in. Try just about every type of education you can imagine. I have to think it's a great way to start. Unless you're very, very fortunate to know exactly what you want to do, which is a bracha. I think it's worth trying your hand at all sorts of different forms of education. So I taught first graders, sixth graders. I was already in high school. I taught in like 8 different yeshivot for a couple of years until I found what I was looking for. Eventually came to the conclusion that I wanted to work first with post-high school students. Then I joined a place called Israelite, which is actually the mother organization of Yeshivat Oraita. Got very involved in informal education, what you would call outreach or kiruv. I have my issues with that term, maybe it'll come up. And then eventually found my way back to post-high school to work with students. And specifically in the realm of Yeshivat Oraita, which is on the one hand, sort of along the lines of some of what you do in Hakotel, share the joy of Judaism, the joy of learning, Torah, mitzvah, and anything else, along with a desire to share sort of a deeper understanding about what Judaism is all about and why we do what we do. And that's basically, I guess, me in a nutshell.
Good. I'm excited to tackle a lot of these issues, so I'll keep my autobiographical descriptions kind of brief. I can almost pronounce some of the things that you're majored in, so I guess that's something. But again, I'll give you a quick brief sketch of how I came to be involved in the things that I'm involved in, and then maybe a minute or two on how I came to be here tonight, which I think is also an important part of the story, and to echo some of the things that my co-panelists had to say. I'm involved now with the NCSY Kolo and have been for some 23 years. I started out there as a madrich on the program. When I was in high school, the program didn't exist. I was involved in high school and other NCSY programs throughout the year, and joined the NCSY Kolo level almost at its inception in the early 90s and been involved with it ever since. My family and I, we made Aliyah 12 years ago. I'm a Rebbe in Rishon also, and I will certainly echo the fact that the lines between formal and informal in this day and age are very, very blurred, to the point that it's sometimes hard to distinguish when the methodologies and characteristics of one are being applied in one case and when they're really shifting over and applying to the other. And I think we're going to get to all of that along the way. One of the things I think that is really unique, not necessarily unique, especially amongst the people I'm sitting with, but in the greater, broader Jewish world, is that those of us who have the privilege to be involved in informal education know and understand that setting the bar high and raising the expectation levels for what our youth and what our community is capable of, that's one of the real important ingredients and real important joys of being involved in this type of work. One of the psukim that we read in this week's parsha, which has multiple explanations, is that Yaakov Avinu, after he wakes up from his dream, so he exclaims, "It was something he was not fully aware of, and the Mefarshim all have, from the very, very basic to the more mystical explanations and interpretations of exactly what was that growth process, that awareness process. What did he come to realize that he didn't know before? And one of the simplest explanations that's given is that for a man who grew up in the home of Yitzchak, in the shadow of Avraham Avinu, with the Imos and the Avos as his role models and as his people, so when you are banished from that place and when you run away from that home, and you're on your own on a mountaintop somewhere, so it would be logical, and in fact it was the case, that Yaakov Avinu could think that in that place there would be no discovery of God. There's a place in which God is easily accessible, and where we can do things that we're supposed to do and that's expected of us. A base medrash like this, standing in the shadow of the Hakotel, virtually anything is possible. But out on a mountaintop in the middle of the camp, or during the months where there's less structure for our high school teams, so it becomes a little bit less realistic to be able to do so. And what we're proud to say, and I think I probably speak for everybody on the panel when I say it also, is to provide the environments where we can have this constant realization of Achein Yesh Hashem Makom Hazeh, Anochi Lo Yadati. I didn't realize that even here and even in these situations, to uncover this hidden potential, both in terms of what you can do in different places and what you're capable of yourself as a person. So that's incredibly exciting. It's really meaningful. I use that word specifically, meaningful, to be involved with this tonight. One of the things I'm sure that will be mentioned is the notion that when you're involved in this line of work, you often gain as much as you give. And the giving that you do allows you to gain as well. Tonight is as good an example as I can think of that. Certainly, it's a drive, and like I said, there are other things and other obligations. That's true that we will have, but I can tell you with a great deal of conviction and a fair amount of pride, to be here tonight is meaningful for us. Not a simple week or month or series of months for Klal Yisrael, and it's a great place to be together, and it's a great topic to talk about together, to talk about building, and to be mechazik each other, and to strengthen what's going on. It's really a tremendous honor to be here. I too thank all of the Amal of the Yeshiva. Rabbi Tarek mentioned that he and I go ways back. He said that when he was at this age, that he wasn't sure he was going to go into Chinuch. I knew him then, and all of us were rooting that he would go into Chinuch, and we're fairly certain that he would also, for the record. It wasn't as big a surprise to us as he claims it may have been for him, but it's incredible to see what he's been able to develop, and your great Rabbi, and so many of you have a relationship with, and so many of our alumni from the program from years past. It's just very special to spend time with you, and of course, I extend that to my co-panelists as well. Just a quick, not to embarrass him at all, but the only introduction I think you need, when I was living in Woodmere, so after a couple of years there we had a new couple move in. It was that was a big explosion. It was around the time that Eish Kodesh and Weinberger was becoming increasingly popular in Woodmere, and there were Jews coming in all the time. Every time a house went up for sale, somebody else was going to do it. There was an unusually frum couple because it was clear they had not been proved for very long. We got to know them, we invited them over, they were Shomer Shabbos, and they were in their late 50s, early 60s. They had come from a town with very few frum Jews, from central New Jersey, and they moved to Woodmere, picked up, and made this drastic change in their life. And we asked them why. They just said, well, rabbinic, of course, an Israelite, of course. One trip to Israel, and they got hooked up and connected somehow. I really was only somewhat familiar with the incredible work that they're doing with that, but that was the only recommendation I've ever needed since then. That type of impact on the community, that type of changing lives. It's really a big honor to be with these two gentlemen up here as well, and exciting, like I said, to share part of this very important project.
Okay, Shakov, we want to move ahead and start asking some of the questions that the panelists received in advance, and we're going to start with Rabbi this time. The first question is guys who are getting into staff age and graduating the Chanich stage. The first question is, as heads of programs, what are you looking for in the staff that you hire?
Okay. First of all, that's a good question. So I know this sounds a little overly simplistic, but I always wanted to love. I think a person just want to love everything they do. I think, I always wanted to be in marriage where I loved every moment. I wanted to reach a level where when I wear tefillin, I love wearing tefillin. It's very different from feeling an obligation. And I wanted to feel that way at work. So the first thing I'm looking for is I'm looking for people who just love them and work with, right? I think that's just sitting like that in the room. And when you sit with a person, one of the questions you have to ask yourself is, would you really enjoy working with this person, right? I can definitely say I'm not trying to be sort of false flattery, but It's definitely true with two people sitting here also. It's just fun to work with certain types of people. You sort of see eye to eye. I read a book once by a fellow named Jim Collins. I forget the name of the other author, which is a discussion in hotel. It's called Built to Last. And they basically did a study on 6 of the largest mega companies in the world. And they're trying to figure out what makes a good company great. Right? They wrote a second book, Good to Great. Companies like Johnson & Johnson and Coca-Cola, they did this 8-year study at Stanford. And one of the conclusions that they arrived at was that every company that was great, all of its staff shared the same core values. Right? And that's not because those core values are necessarily the best. Right? But whatever your core values are, so you have to share those core values with the people that you work with and the people you work for. Right? You could debate the question of seal notes, for example. It's a legitimate debate. You could debate the question of the balance between learning Torah and work ethic. You could debate, sort of the value of convincing versus sharing. Maybe we'll get into that. But if those are your values, then you want to work with people who share those values. And that doesn't mean you always agree. I'm sure there's 2 in Hakotel, but I know over to right there, there's a very broad section of the different vein. We're there. You can see it in the way we dress. You can see it in the way we share Torah. But it's definitely true that we all share the same core values. The third is you're looking for people who are balanced. Study Hakotel Deos from the Rambam. He believes that that's all about sort of noting what the extremes are and finding the middle ground, what that balance is. It's an interesting question of how you know when you're off balance and what balance is. And certain people, they're just healthy. They're balanced, they're healthy. And I think the last thing, and this is just advice to you in life, I think you have to be real. And I think that you enjoy working with people when they're real. Who you are in all your different environments is the same person. We do like, I don't know, Friday night dinner in Yeshivat, or a Friday night dinner Israelite style outreach, or a Friday night dinner at home. It's the same energy. I've been to sometimes when you go to a Shabbaton and the rabbi gets up and he puts on his rabbi's voice. And he has a different sort of modus operandi when he's sharing Shabbos with his congregants than he does at home. I never wanted to be that way. And the way we do it at a right Friday night dinner, welcome to join us sometime, is exactly the way I do it at home. And the people that you want to work with, I think, are the people who are real in that way. They're just who they are, right?
Passion is indispensable. You have to, as Rabbi Friedman said, you have to really want to do what you're doing. There can't be ulterior motives. You're allowed to benefit from the many, many social opportunities that can exist in any informal education settings. You could be looking for your own friends, and you can be looking for all sorts of things, and I guess that's okay to an extent. But the primary motivation for your involvement has to be a passion and a desire to do it. Number 2, let me tell you what one of the great myths is. Certainly on our program, and I'm sure it's not the only one, we tend to stereotype. You may be familiar with that in our community from time to time. There's such a thing as a Hakotel guy, or a Reisha guy, or a Gush guy, or any other yeshiva, or any other community, or any other high school. And the more you know these things, the more you know any community or any individuals, you know that that's kind of silly, those types of stereotypes along the way. Sometimes we try to present ourselves in an interview on our resume or build ourselves up to be a particular model of person, a ball player or a cool personality or the typical task counselor or Yeshivat advisor or NCSY advisor. I think that's probably the worst thing that you can do. In fact, again, shifting over to the very, very practical from the more general, when you present somebody else's credentials or when you present what you're trying to project instead of what you are, you're doing yourself an amazing, amazing disservice. Anything that's unique about you, idiosyncrasies about you, ways that you don't fit the mold, make you a much more attractive candidate. And the reason why you're a much more attractive candidate is because you're likely to be a much more effective madrech or mashpia when you're able to take advantage of those idiosyncrasies and those different personalities that you have. So you have people who come, like I said, using the ball example, you have people who show up to an interview sometimes in the summer, and they'll say, well, I don't even know if I belong here. I know all the madrichim are great ball players. I don't play ball. I mean, it works. I'm not saying if you're a bad ball player, it's an advantage to you necessarily. But if you're a good violin player, or if you're great with the guys who don't play ball, or anything else like that, obviously it is a huge, huge advantage, and it speaks well for you. And the fact that you're yourself and you know what you can do, that's very important too. I will say, shifting finally to the very, very practical, that we deal with a population, the ages people in this room also, who don't always have had the luxury or the opportunity for vast experiences. Much of our staff that we hire is at least a year or two older because of that. Some are at the age that you're at right now, but experience matters a lot also. There are a lot of good guys around and a lot of people who should get involved on low-level positions during the year, getting involved in youth work. Nothing speaks better. If you're asking the question specifically of the type of people we hire, you have to gain life experiences with the population that you're going to be dealing with. Whether, like I said, whatever that group is, but if it's teenagers on the types of programs that we're dealing with, or any other outreach or chesed organizations or the like, anything in the realm of informal education, experience matters more than anything else you have on the resume. The most important recommendations you can have, even if it's sometimes tricky about how to get these recommendations, but if there's a 10th grader who says that this person is the one who taught me to love Gemara, this person is the one who got me to be excited about davening, you can't have a better letter of recommendation than that as far as we're concerned. And you have to do those things, not just have the potential to do it. Rabbi Stephen Berg, who is a good friend of mine and a great mentor in this area of leadership training and the like, he once taught me, and I think I may have mentioned it last year, but he once taught me a great yesod in management on that note. And it's interesting because I believe it is a great yesod, but even after I say it, you could flip it around the other way. If you play along at home, you'll see if you can guess which way it's going to end it all. But he was responsible when he was serving as the director of NCSY, the National International Director of NCSY. So he was based in New York and was managing people working in the organization all across the country, and in some cases beyond the boundaries of North America as well. And it's very, very difficult to assess all the time when you're not with them how they're doing and what they're doing. And he shared with me the following trick, which I'm happy to share with you. He said when he calls up any of his people and asks them, how is it going, he always gets one of two answers. There are those who tell them all the things they've done in the past week, and there are those who tell them all the things they are going to do in the past week. And here's where the play along at home part comes in. Which do you think are the successful ones, and which do you think are the unsuccessful ones? So you can make a case for either one. There is great value in saying that you have a vision and a plan, and that would lend to say that the ones who tell you what they're going to do are the more successful ones. But he said invariably, his successful people were the ones who told him excitedly what they had done the past week. Not just a vision for what's going to be, but tachlis, what they had been able to accomplish and what they were able to do. Again, if those people were to stop at that point and not be planning the future, that would be one thing. So when you show up, it shouldn't just be about what you're planning to do. You should have, like I said, as much of a track record in dealing with the population that you are as possible, and get those experiences. They will help you. It's hard to excite and inspire high school kids in this day and age. It's not impossible, but it's tricky sometimes. And we're up against a lot. We can remember back to our high school days and remember, like I said, we weren't always receptive to every message that was shown our way. Experience helps a lot. The more you can speak, the more you can get involved, the more you can do, the better you can do.
I would agree with much of my analysts. I think that there's a number of other things that I look for. A level of empathy, a level of caring about what we're doing, sensitivity to children and caring about children's needs. Intentionality. I think intentionality is a critical component of somebody who works at Machane Stone. And I think being part of a chevra and realizing that you are not on your own, but being able to give leman klal, even if the prat yourself is not always valuable to the same degree. And having a personality that is involved in you to the klal, realizing that they're part of the chevra, I think is a critical part of what we try to do. And lastly, I think that a feeling of changing the world, knowing that we have a great responsibility with every moment of every day that we have with our children, and knowing that we can change worlds by just even a very small nuance of how we convey sensitivity and information.
Okay. Before I ask the next question, I just wanted to point out, I think, 2 points. Number one is the excitement that I have for the panelists of the respect that they have for each other, which is very important, even though they're very different programs. And specifically, what we brought here is to have the diversity of the programs, and for them to, this is really for you to hear a multitude of different types of answers. That will lead me also into the next question. The next question is that there are different programs out there that are helping Am Yisrael. We'd love to hear your thoughts on a very sensitive topic. Do you think that co-education in informal education is a lechatchila nowadays or b'diavad? You want to start with? Who's up? Think about it, welcome, right?
The question of whether or not we live in a co-ed world, whether or not that's the determining factor, might be one of those things. Yes, Machane Stone believes in co-educational programs. We believe in the creating of a chevra that banim and banot are always validated, and the fact of the matter is that they learn how to work well together. That I'm now dealing with a group of banim, and banim to be able to really appreciate what banot bring to the fore, not just in terms of leadership, but in terms of their histakut al Torah, and their ability to work within a chevra is critically important. And the key is, again, is that even within a co-educational framework, there are times in which you educate by gender-specific involvement, and that I think should be clear to everyone. But the idea of that banim and banot should be in an environment together in order to grow together, realizing the pitfalls and fully understanding the dangers involved, yet embracing those dangers and moving it forward in a sense where there's vigilance and understanding, because that in fact is the chevra that we will all be living with and all of us will be working within in our lives, is something that Machane Stone embraces.
I think I was supposed to ask for the benefits first, so I apologize.
Oh, great. Anytime, feel free. I'm going to cheat a little bit, maybe not completely, but I'm going to cheat a little bit. I think there's before I cheat, I'll whet your appetite with the cheating. I think there's a price to be paid in both directions. There are pluses, there are gains and benefits that exist on either side. I do have concerns about the lechatchila nature of co-educational opportunities and learning environments in particular, but I want to be very clear as to what those concerns are based on and how that gets into my sort of evasiveness on the question. I strongly believe, of course, that the part, at least, of the answer to the question is that it depends. Rabbi Rother mentioned that as well, that depending on what you're trying to accomplish and when you're trying to accomplish it, and very, very importantly, with whom you're trying to accomplish it. Clearly, just for those who may not be aware, I mean, NCSY's programs run the gamut, including those that are quite co-educational and very much Peshita co-educational, and take advantage of many of the benefits and opportunities that co-educational educational environments offer to you. They exist, and other programs are less so. And that's not exactly what was described before about a co-educational environment that might splinter off to more gender-specific learning modules along the way. But like I said, there is a time and a place for sure, and depending on who your audience and what the goal is, then obviously there can be very, very different answers. So one level of evading the question by saying, well, of course, it depends. I think that when your primary goal is to achieve a very high level of focus, particularly on Limud Torah and commitment to it, in the high school years, the existence of the co-educational environment is exceedingly distracting, both in a formal educational level in the high schools and on an informal education, perhaps even more so in the informal education environment. It's often very, very difficult to get people to be fully focused on what you want them to be focused on when they have such clear and present distractions. And I'll get back to that in a minute and have to take any follow-up questions about it also. I think in some ways, though, what's more important, given the fact, like I said, that we can sit here and say, and just get away with it by saying that it depends and for whom and what's going on. And obviously there are segments of the population that we are dealing with in North American Jewry and in Israeli Jewry, where co-educational environments are the only option, and that's all that's going to be. So it almost becomes a little bit of a moot point. I think the way the question is phrased matters more than the answer. The lichatchila or b'diavad paradigm. I think it's just very important for all of us as educators, formal and informal, and as consumers of the different educational opportunities that exist in our community to be constantly asking the question, is this model that we've set up ideal for what we want to accomplish. For those institutions that feel that they are building towards a greater commitment to Talmud Torah, to observance of halacha, to being proud and passionate members of the Jewish community, and they feel strongly that the ideal way for them to achieve that goal is through the coeducational model, the difference that I have and the disagreement I have with them, to me, is relatively insignificant. Because there's always going to be debate about methodology and about how to best set up. And at the end of the day, there are certainly going to be consumers who will benefit from the variety of options that are presented to them. Our community is stronger and better for the fact that there are incredibly wholesome and healthy co-educational opportunities and those that are not co-educational. That makes for a better community because our community is diverse and has many people. Where we run into trouble and where the disagreement, I think, becomes more sharp, and not, God forbid, a disagreement with anybody I'm sitting up here right now, where the disagreement becomes more sharp is where co-education becomes synonymous with not sharing that lechatchila perspective, where either implicitly or explicitly, the reality is that the environment that is set up is not anybody's idea, not any guidance, not any mentor, not any, whatever you want to use the term of the leaders of our community, not something that was set up as being the ideal way to achieve a particular goal in terms of advancing the cause of the Jewish people and educating our students, but something that just happens to be, and that's when we run into trouble of its getting in the way and of its getting distracted. I hope that's clear in what's said. Meaning, if you come up with an answer that you believe that coeducation is ideal and is the right way to go, and you are in the aggressive pursuit of these same goals of advancing and educating the Jewish people, that's one thing. Sometimes I believe that it gets muddled in all environments. That message and that goal certainly could be lost even in an old boy or old girl environments. But I think it gets lost more easily sometimes in the coeducational environments, where you have an environment which almost automatically gets associated with more compromise, and gets associated without there being the same goals. If you believe and support it, in building, being part of a co-educational environment that is utterly and completely committed to those advancements, to that passion, to that commitment to halacha, to Talmud Torah, and you believe that the best way to do that is through co-education, like I said, that's still a discussion I'd love to have, be interested to have what to say about, but the disagreement would be much less sharp and pointed than it is when co-education becomes a symptom of a certain laxity and lack of focus in terms of what the educational goals are.
Before I begin, just so you know, just time-wise, towards the last 20 minutes, there are going to be questions. So anything that the panelists have said is definitely a full game to re-ask and to clarify, as obviously is done with a certain amount of respect.
Okay. First of all, I guess a little bit of personal history is in order. We have kind of 4 children, and all 4 children have actually spent time in Camp Stone. They've spent time in co-ed camps, non-co-ed camps. Interestingly, all of them went to, I guess you call them unisex high schools. And obviously I'm now involved, when I was running Israelite programs, they were very much co-ed. And now we have the boys yeshiva, which we never considered making co-ed. So obviously it depends a lot on the circumstances and the situation. And there are a lot of variables. You have to know the environment. One co-ed environment would be very different from another. I can think of programs that are co-ed, that just the nature of their being co-ed, in my opinion, makes them almost non-grata. I think they're going to fail educationally just by the nature of the audiences they're involved with. And I can think of co-ed environments that are actually lechatchila. I know somebody who's in a Shirut Leumi program with a real quality group of kids, and the stuff that they're doing, it actually makes a lot of sense in their co-ed. So a lot of it depends on the circumstances. I think it's really, really important that, there are 3 factors that make for a successful yeshiva experience for you in Israel. One of them is the guys that you're with, which is very much part of your environment. One of them is the content that you're in. And the third are the role models that you have. And I think one of your goals over the course of this year, not only this year, is a selach hara. You should have people in your life that you can really gain guidance from on these questions, people that you're close to, people you respect. And I think when you're struggling with this question, you have to avail yourself of that kind of advice and that kind of, at the end of the day, you have to make your own decisions. That's number 2. Number 3, I think that that whatever you do, now I'm speaking to you thinking of going on to educate in a co-ed environment or a non-co-ed environment. You know, you're debating between going to teach a camp stone or going to teach on the inside white folk, right? And I think it really depends on a lot of different issues. You know, when I was in the Army, one of the things they trained you, certainly in officers course, is something called dapa'ot. A dapa is a derech pulai sharit. And what that means is that anytime you're bound to a mission, anytime you're on a nuke or anything, you have to consider every different possibility. And you have to exhaust yourself imagining what are the questions that are going to come up. You know, so if you're on a mission, you know, what happens if the machine gun fails, and what happens if you get lost, and what happens if the, you know, the kochot that are there to back you up disappear, and on. I think that's even more true when you get into these types of educational experiences. What are the things that can go wrong? You have to know who you are. You have to trust people who think know who you are as well. I would say, by the way, that from a halakhic perspective, the co-ed environment is very complicated. A lot of that theory, and you know, I'm a B'nai Akiva Nekbadam. I grew up within that framework to some degree. But having said that, if you study the halakhic background of the original theory, again, Rothman would be much more knowledgeable than I am because it just isn't my field. But I know, for example, you know, there's a famous hefter, there's 3 days that B'nai Akiva relied on. I'm not sure if B'nai Akiva relied on all the other who wrote those 3 days phenomenon. It's a very complicated question. I think this is where our benefits, not that it needs my approbation, is correct. We really have to constantly reassess. Sometimes we get into a routine and we're so used to it, it makes so much sense. Sometimes you have to take a step back and ask yourself, is this routine still valid and does it work? I would say that of all the environments, there are 2 that I would really personally struggle with if they were co-ed. One is the Yeshiva High School. You know, there are, for example, I live in Efrat, and there are a number of different schools. On the elementary and middle school level, there are co-ed educational experiences and unisex educational experiences. We sent 3 of our kids to sort of boys or girls schools, but one of our kids actually went to a co-ed school because it really fit her. And it seems to have worked out, although I'm not objective on the matter. But I would have great hesitation. And I say this knowing that there are boys here who probably went to places like Ramaz and Frisch and whatever. My experience has been that that's a much more challenging educational model. And I'm happy to discuss that with the boys anytime there are boys from Moraita who struggle with that question. Having said that, I think that, I mean, I've had this discussion with some of the educators in those schools. They know their audience. And they know, for whatever the reason, within modern orthodoxy, whatever labels we choose, that there is a very significant audience that would not be going to Yeshiva High School if they closed down co-ed school. So that creates a challenging, you know, sort of discussion. And I think that you have to go into these things with your eyes open. Now, to say one last thing, which relates to a different question. You know, ultimately, you have to ask yourself, whenever you do what you do, why you're doing it. You know, there's a famous, whatever, I've heard a person in a shir from a big English many years ago. Gra and Evan Shleiman has a whole discussion about what to do when you have a difficult decision to make. Allah doesn't tell you what to do. Now, we think the Torah always provides the answer. It's not true. You're not sure whether to be a doctor or a lawyer. The Torah doesn't tell you to be a doctor or a lawyer. It'll tell you how to behave as a lawyer or a doctor. I remember Van Kala once asking how anybody can become a lawyer and still deal with embarrassed shekher tzarchat, but you can do it, you know, if you want to, whatever. But part of that question is what are the motivations that you have for making a decision? And if you do what objectively is the wrong thing, make the wrong decision, but you're doing it for the right reasons, it'll work out. If you do the right thing, but you're doing it for the wrong reasons, it won't work out. So at the very least, whatever choices you make sure that you're sure that you're doing them for the right reasons with a lot of difference.
Okay, we're going to ask one more question before opening up to the audience. The number 6 on the paper. Another issue that arises for many yeshiva graduates that they see living in Israel as an ideal, but feel that they can have greater impact in Chutz La'aretz. What would you recommend to someone facing this dilemma? I think last time I asked Rothman first, and I think Rabbi is finished, so we're going to start with Rabbi again.
I just need to do the question again. I apologize. It's going to Chutz La'aretz.
Number 6.
Number 6. Okay.
If you can, try to keep these answers brief, so we can have.
Oh, that's a question. This is exactly what we were just talking about. Right? I don't judge anybody who lives in Chutz La'aretz. I don't think 3 major criteria for living in Chutz La'aretz really exist. You can't say you need to go to Chutz La'aretz to find Shia. You can't say you need to go to Chutz La'aretz to learn Torah. And you can't say anymore, I think it's certainly becoming less and less true, that you need to go to Chutzlar to make it for us. Never mind the tough issues. Having said that, I had a roommate who goes I was very close with, and we had this debate all the time. He went back to America, went to YU, came above, has had an enormous impact there. And he felt, for whatever the reasons, because of language and whatever else, he just didn't feel he would have that kind of an impact here in Israel. Who am I to judge? Who knows what people do? I do think we have to struggle with the question. If you're not really sincerely struggling with the question, you're missing one of the major challenges of our generation. At the end of the day, every generation has its question. Our parents' generation, their question was, when we all get up to Shemayim, whatever that means. My first will ask this question, where were you? Our question is going to be, why didn't you come home? You have to have a good answer to that question.
Yeah, I certainly agree strongly with that. I think for many of us who grew up in North America, the question too often is do I have a good enough reason to go? The status quo, which is normal, it's inertia. Where I was, where I grew up is where I am, and if there's enough motivation to leave, then I'll leave. And I think the most important thing is to ask the question and just to flip that around. It has to be a compelling reason not to be here in order to be able to do it. I assume that the focus of the question is for those who are considering a career in chinuch or formal education, informal education. The reality is that it's not such a pretty picture, because there is certainly a scenario here, and here I'll be, I guess, a little bit more accepting of this reality than Ravini might be. But I've spoken to many, a friend, colleague, and countless students who legitimately feel, and you mentioned the language, that's certainly part of it, but just the number of opportunities, the pay scale and the like, where opportunities for impact are simply greater in the United States in this field than they are in Eretz Yisrael. It's not a very great business to get into. In fact, probably I shouldn't say this, but we'll spice it up a little bit, just to defend the lawyers a little bit, from Hakotel. I wonder what you think about the Israel recruiters, and it's a hard profession also. Not Israel recruiter. I mean, the business in general will be a hard, lawyers don't have a monopoly on that type of, that type of China. And the truth is, though, in all seriousness, that's a product of a almost unhealthy job market, I think, that exists. And a dearth of stability in some of our institutions and great competition. And that affects, like I said, what is a difficult and tricky job market also along the way. So it is a real legitimate challenge. Of course, like I said, the simplest answer is to say, ask yourself every day, I'll just draw it, not because it's sometimes these anecdotes are difficult and personal histories are there, but I started out, I did not jump on a plane, even though my wife and I spoke about it when we were dating, and even though we clearly had a strong desire to come to Eretz Yisrael, but I spent the first 8-9 years of my professional career in the United States because I just did not feel that the opportunities presented themselves well enough. What we're proud of is, like I said, is following the model that I just described to you. We asked ourselves with regularity, is now the time? Is now the time? Is now the time? And on the first day that we thought that now was the time, then we were able to come and we were able to do it. And I couldn't agree more with what Ravini said and the way he said it, that becomes the critical point, that you're asking that question all of the time, and that it doesn't become set that you're there until something pushes you not to be there. It should be the exact other way around, that we're here unless there's a really compelling reason for us not to be here.
I would only add 2 things. Number one, I agree with you in terms of Talich, that you ask yourself constantly. But the other thing that I would also ask you to ask yourselves is it's not only about you, it's about your children, it's about your family, it's about the needs of our people here. And so your success in Chutz La'aretz, as a mechanech, as whatever you do, is one thing. But sometimes sacrifices need to be made for your family. And I would just ask you to take into consideration, how long is long enough and how long is staying there. And when you realize that there is something else that needs to be taken into consideration if you want your children to become first generation, even though you will always be a greener. So it's something to think about along those lines also.
Okay, at this point, even though there are a couple of questions, I think one of the things we do, this is our second year doing it, we are taking a lot of feedback from all our students, and last year some of the questions are different, And to spice it up even more, one of the things that we wanted to open up is for the audience to be able to ask a couple questions, follow-up questions. I personally have some follow-up questions also if you don't have. But if you want, for the next 10 to 15 minutes, to some follow-up questions, we'll figure out how to do it again to keep it brief so we can move things along. Mr. Moses.
I should say I'm coming from England. I don't know the American formal education market so well, so the question might not be shy, but hopefully it is. Definitely in England. How do you successfully incorporate formal, traditional textual education and learning into what is essentially an informal setting where the Khanajim probably don't come in with such a desire to want to sit down and learn some Gemara? How do you successfully incorporate that and inspire them to do so?
Well, the question, I don't know exactly who, in other words, if you're talking about Oraita, that is a formal program. If you're talking about NCS Mykola, which is more of a formalized program, if you're talking about other NCS My programs, I'm sure that Moshe will speak to that. But in terms of Machaneh, in other words, one of the things that you have to ask yourself is if you have a number of times that you are actually working with a child, let's say on textual skills, you need to realize that whatever shiurim you're going to have, let's say we have 5 or 6 different types of shiurim over a day in Machaneh, so which ones of those are going to be specifically text-based? So that's number one, in order that they don't lose their skills, in order for them to, be able to hone their skills, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's important. In other words, when you look at all the different types of shiurim that you give, you should have shiurim that are textually based and be able to do that even within a Machaneh environment. Those two things are not mutually exclusive. That's number one. Number two, I think that goes into a general question as to how you're breaking down the formal and informal spheres. In other words, if you're creating an environment and community where every single aspect of what you do is intentional, every single aspect of how you operate in Machaneh is that way. In other words, it's not just baseball, it's not just football, it's not just glass blowing, it's not just this or that, but every single thing has a specific tochnit, nosei, programmatic telos, end goal. Okay, then every single thing becomes experiential and kafuf to that nosei. And therefore, I think that there are times within a multifocal, multimodality system that you have text learning even during the summer, even in a place where it doesn't seem that text learning is something which is, the norm.
I'm sure for all the panelists, you don't have to have a chiyuv to answer, so we can get more questions also. If you're passionate about it, if you want us to hear it, all the different things that you said, please with simcha. If not, we can definitely go to other questions also.
Well, I'll just add one thing. One of the most important things you can do in any educational endeavor is to ask yourself what your goals are. I remember once I ran the Shabbat programs for the Jewish agency. As basically you would get kids who were totally out to lunch Jewishly. I mean, I remember we were inside a group where 3 of them were Jewish skinheads. They had like swastikas shaved into the back of their heads. Like that's how far out to lunch some of these kids were. And the whole idea was they go on a tour of Masada, they go on a tour of Garda, let them come on a tour of Shabbat. And so I always try to have one shiur where there's some textual experience, but the goal was just that they could see what it meant to learn a text and love it. That's a very different energy, for example, from where you're in a program where you want to get these skills and learn. So the biggest question is what your goal is, and then you'll figure out how to work.
On the previous question, a couple times I've mentioned regarding possibly moving to Israel was that your focus should be more what's keeping you from doing it as opposed to what's going to have you do. So the question is for people generally like the age of the people in this room, there aren't concrete options like it's this versus this. It's more of you have aspirations and there are theoretical things that you can accomplish, but you don't know, speaking more about Chazar, it's things that you aspire to do, but you don't know that you can necessarily achieve them or whether you will. So when you're considering Aliyah, how should you take into account that you think that you have things that might be a strong enough reason to stay in America, but you don't know if you're going to actually ever get around to them?
Look, Judaism, Torah suggests that the Jewish people is here. Future Jewish people is here. We're all going to have it. Your grandchildren and great-grandchildren are going to be here. That's number one. Number two, there's not this one. Number two, The easiest time to make Aliyah is actually now. That's what I did. I didn't actually get on a plane and decide going on Aliyah. I just decided to stay, right? It's very hard to make Aliyah later on. We have a Rebbe in Araita who just came this past summer. He was lucky enough to come into a job. Like Rebbe Benjamin said, not everybody has that. But if you're thinking about this, I don't know, sometimes there's something to be said for doing the experiment now. You can always decide to still go back there. But the longer you're there, the more difficult it is to come. Right? That's just a practical issue. You don't know. You never know. Hashem runs the world. We have lots of plans. But Torah tells us the Jewish people belong here. So unless you have a compelling reason to go there, you have to ask yourself what your reasons really are. You know, have a little bit down.
In the beginning, Rebbe, you mentioned that you don't necessarily like the phrase here. And then after that, you mentioned that there's a difference between convincing versus sharing. Assuming those two statements are related. I was wondering if you could elaborate on that.
Oh, sure. I'll try to keep this brief. The Lubavitcher Rebbe, who one could make a case, you know, from the south, I'm in the south end. He really wanted to go there, he actually, and I know this personally from someone who's very close to him, he did not like the phrase kiruv. It's a longer story, because the word kiruv from the word karov means I'm close, you're not, I'll bring you in. Outreach is the same word, right? You're out, I'm in, come join us. How do we know who's close to our center? The real word we're looking for is education. So I understand we use these words because sometimes in a dialogue you need them, right? And I think that speaks a certain attitude. Right? Once you talk about education, we all need education. But there aren't people who've grown up in the yeshiva world their whole lives and need a little kiruv. We have a lot of work to get close to Hashem. We're all trying to get close to Hashem. That's first of all. Second of all, there's an opinion. You could really debate this. I actually think that this is just about different cups of tea for different philosophies. You know, different yeshiva are like different restaurants. It's not that one is better or one is worse. That's what you're looking for, right? If you're looking for Italian food, you don't go to a Chinese restaurant. If you ask me which restaurant I like to eat in, I'm not a big believer in convincing anybody. I find that once you get into an argument, right, with someone about these types of topics, everybody loses, right? I think it's more about sharing. You know, it's like imagine I could introduce you to a great girl, right? Set you up with a girl. I'm actually not the guy to do that. I set up the Amazon with a pygmy, but whatever, right? But imagine that I could introduce you to a great girl. If I have to convince you to marry her, something's wrong, right? So I'll share with you. Right? I mean, that's a right response. We'll share with you what we find beautiful about Judaism, about Torah, about mitzvah, about learning. What you do with it is up to you. So, and I think that's a very healthy way to approach this entire field, because it gives people the space to come to it on their own terms. And I think you'll find, now this is just an opinion, that at least these two gentlemen sitting here, I mean, I've seen this in both their institutions, they do the same thing. And I think.
Before I take one more follow-up, I have a follow-up question for the benefits who think many of us growing up, we talk about the spice of the challenges of the co-ed education. I would like to hear from your experience what you have found, both in brief, the advantages of the singular, in your case, the boys working together, and what you think are the pitfalls that way.
It's easy to start with the pitfalls because I think they're important. Rossner alluded to them before, and I think he's correct with it. Those who grow up, especially in a more co-educational, it's not educational, but a world that involves men and women to a great measure, the modern world, certainly I do believe are lacking in something if they have not had that as part of their education the whole way. And that is an issue along the way. I also think that simply in terms of social development, I do acknowledge and believe that there is something to be gained by young men and young women having to kind of measure themselves and having to grow in the context of those relationships. I think it brings out certain positive elements from time to time, and a lack of that, therefore, would be a drawback. But I am concerned about the costs that exist on the other side that you mentioned also. And human beings are pleasure-seeking creatures and are easily distracted by that pursuit of pleasure. It doesn't mean that we're animals. It doesn't mean that we always have our most base ideas there all the time that are going on for us. But it means that we're easily distracted. It's hard for us to be focused on many, many goals at once. And when a 14, 15, 16-year-old boy is sitting in a classroom or sitting in a chabura or sitting in a camp environment, I think it is difficult for him to simultaneously fall in love with the Daf Gemara while he is competing with emotions that have him feeling strong feelings and emotion, natural feelings and emotions towards people of the opposite gender as well. I've seen it firsthand many times. Like I said, it becomes a lot of the way that we grow, and maybe it's not the way we should grow and learn, but it is the way we grow and learn. Is a little bit of a domino effect. When pieces are in place, see this in Yeshiva from time to time. And again, this is an example where it certainly should not be this way. But if a person knows the end game, they know that they're going to, let's say, a particular university where Jewish life is going to be exceedingly difficult. So rather than what should happen, which is that, okay, that's the reality, and let's strengthen you as much as possible and make that experience as productive as possible, so the end game of ending up in that university pushes dominoes back in the direction. Well, I know it's going to be at the end, therefore I'm not going to listen or participate or get fully involved in what's going on right now with this. Like I said, the last question kind of pushes dominoes back, rightly or wrongfully, but it pushes the dominoes back in a strong sequence. I think that could happen sometimes in co-education also. If I know what I'm ultimately going to be focused on, if I know what I'm not willing to compromise on, if I know what I'm distracted on, so that pushes a lot of things out of the way along the way. And like I said, I think that can become dangerous.
We have one more minute now for the question, just to be a little aggressive. I don't know if there's a rebuttal, or if there should be a rebuttal then to what was just said, or if it's not necessary, I can just thank everybody.
I think that
I would say the rebuttal more response.
the response I believe in is, I think there's the question of the strength of the Mizgeret. The Mizgeret in the Chevra is the critical point here. Who do you have in your Chevra? How does the Chevra deem what's important and what's not important? How does the Chevra create a situation in which one realizes that, and exactly the question that you said, Moshe, question about focus. What is your ultimate focus? When all those things are put aside, and your complete focus is on the Chevra, and you become one with that mission, then many of those things which might be distracting, even though there's no question in a case where you have, men and women, young men and women together, that there is that sexual tension, whatever, even in the most, I'm going to use the word sanitized situation. But in a situation where the avodah, the hatmadah, is given towards the development of chanichim and chanichot, and being dugma yishit lemofet is what drives your entire being. It's a question of who you are at the end of the day, and therefore how you function within the Mizgeret. And if you're telling me that you're incapable of doing that, then I would say, number one, the Mizgeret doesn't deserve you, and you have a difficulty in terms of working within any of those Mizgeret. And part of what we try to do, when we try to create a Machanet, is the Mizgeret in which the complete and utter focus, and what I'm saying is 24/7. In other words, like I look at my tzedek, like we're going to play basketball. What do you going to play basketball? There's just no basketball here. You are driven in as a chaver baby drash, or as a madrika madrika, where you are 24/7, 365, living that mission, living that goal, and you are so passionate about it because you know what's at stake is obvious. That's the question. And at that point, many of the things, your personal needs, your personal limitations disappear. When you are pushed to that point, when it becomes a chayav, and you're on the 80th kilometer, and you're pushing yourself, there's one focus, and the focus is the goal. And how do we achieve that goal? And that's what I'm trying to achieve, what we're trying to achieve. So I would agree with you 100% that there are those distractions, and to absorb them and realize the sakana on the one hand. On the other hand, the question that I would ask is your personal strength and the strength of these Mizgeret around.
We want to thank the panelists for practical advice for us as we think about who we want to be. At the same time, ideological questions for us to think about, both within who we want to be and who we want to be a part of, and together helping out the Am Yisrael and the chinuch of Am Yisrael and the young men and women in our community. Our is now based
Sorry.